The email landed in my inbox, not with a parent's concern about a failing grade, but with the digital slap of a bank alert joint and Jess as CCUNBLNCEO doing uttered. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was holed up in my classroom, grading papers on the nuances of the American Revolution, the irony thick enough to choke on. Olivia, my wife of 15 years, the woman who'd feigned concern that morning over my persistent cough, and urged me to finally see a doctor about the stress-induced palpitations I'd been experiencing, had apparently staged her own revolution. Below the $0 bombshell was a forwarded message from a lawyer I'd never heard of, Mr. Davies. This communication serves as notification that Ms. Olivia Davies, Lyde Miller, has initiated proceedings for the dissolution of your marriage. All marital assets under her purview have been secured pending an equitable distribution. Please direct all future correspondence to my office. Secured. She called gutting our life savings securing assets. My chest, already tight from months of unexplained anxiety and sleepless nights, now felt like a vise was crushing it. 1 at 87, 542.33, every penny we'd painstakingly saved, my emergency fund, money for potential medical bills, the down payment for a small cabin we'd talked about for years gone. My first instinct wasn't rage, strangely. It was a hollow, echoing silence in my head, like the moment after a historical catastrophe, before the full extent of the damage is realized. I managed to text my sister Sarah, a simple, need you, code red. She was a charge nurse, she understood urgency. Her reply was immediate, my place. Now, key under the mat. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. I somehow navigated through lesson plans and student questions, a ghost in my own life, before driving not to the home Olivia had just detonated, but to Sarah's quiet apartment across town. In looking back, the portents of this particular blitzkrieg were there, subtle signals I'd dismissed like a historian overlooking inconvenient truths. Olivia's interest in our finances, once a shared Sunday morning ritual over coffee and spreadsheets, had waned to an almost pointed disinterest in the last year. You handle it, Artie, you're better with numbers, she'd say, waving a dismissive hand before burying her nose in her phone, which had become surgically attached to her palm, often angled away from me. Then there were the new friends. From her yoga studio, names I vaguely registered but faces I never saw, leading to increasingly frequent girls' nights out or weekend retreats. I'd chalked it up to her needing space, a common casualty of long-term marriages. Fool. Two things, however, stood as unintentional bulwarks. Firstly, the small inheritance from my Aunt Millie. I'd used it years ago as the sole down payment on our house, and because Olivia was too busy with her new boutique job to attend the closing, the deed remained solely in my name. It was an oversight, a convenience at the time, that now felt like a providential act. She'd never pressed to be added. Secondly, after a health scare 3 years prior, a misdiagnosed heart arrhythmia that thankfully turned out to be severe anxiety, I'd meticulously updated my will and, crucially, set up a separate, modest investment account. Just a little nest egg for future curriculum development projects, maybe a research trip to Europe. I'd told Olivia. She'd smiled, called it sweet, and promptly forgotten about it, uninterested in its paltry sums compared to our joint savings. That paltry sum, I now realized with a jolt, was probably all I had left. I remember one particular evening, about 6 months ago. Olivia came home late, smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine, and excitedly talked about a fantastic investment opportunity a new friend had told her about. When I asked for details, she became vague and defensive, accusing me of not trusting her. I dropped it, attributing it to her enthusiasm for new things, but a small, cold knot had formed in my stomach. It was still there. I met Olivia at a university alumni mixer. I was a newly minted history teacher, full of passion for the past. She was working in the alumni relations office, charming and vivacious. I was drawn to her energy, a stark contrast to my own more reserved nature. She said she loved how my eyes lit up when I talked about historical figures as if they were old friends. We dated for a year, a whirlwind of local museum visits, cozy dinners, and long talks about everything and nothing. We married on a crisp autumn day, surrounded by golden leaves and hopeful friends. The early years were good. We were a team. I'd spend evenings grading. She'd be sketching designs for a small online jewelry business she dreamed of. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had each other. Or so I thought. She'd always been supportive of my career, even if she sometimes joked about my dusty old books. Our backgrounds were different. I came from a family of educators and civil servants, modest, quiet, valuing stability and intellectual pursuits. Olivia's parents were small business owners, more flamboyant, focused on appearances and achieving a certain lifestyle. We managed to bridge these differences for a long time, or perhaps I simply chose not to see how they might eventually form a chasm. We built a comfortable life in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I found fulfillment in teaching, in shaping young minds, in trying to make history relevant. Olivia eventually opened a small boutique with a friend, which did moderately well, but seemed to require ever-increasing investments and long hours, many of which, I now suspected, were spent elsewhere. She craved a level of luxury my teacher's salary couldn't quite provide, a fact that became a subtle, unspoken tension between us. The first real hairline crack appeared about 5 years ago. Olivia started making snide remarks about my contentment. Is this it, Artie? PTA meetings and grading papers until we retire. Her ambition, once directed at her own creative pursuits, seemed to curdle into a general dissatisfaction. Our conversations, once rich with shared ideas and latter, thinned to logistical discussions about bills and errands. She began to socialize more with a flashier crowd, people whose lives revolved around expensive hobbies and brand names. My attempts to engage her in intellectual discussions, something she used to enjoy, were met with eye rolls or distracted scrolling on her phone. Shared hobbies, like our weekend hikes, were replaced by her solo trips to spa weekends. Then came the complete disengagement from household finances, which I'd initially seen as her trusting my judgment, but now understood as abdication coupled with secretive planning. The breaking point I see now wasn't a single event but a slow erosion, culminating in that lawyer's email. Yet, there was one incident last summer I'd suggested we use some savings to finally replace our aging car. Olivia had been vehemently against it, insisting the money was earmarked for something important, something she refused to elaborate on. She became so agitated that I backed down, puzzled and a little hurt by her secrecy. It was a clear sign, a red flag fluttering madly, and I treated it like a minor breeze. Huddled in Sarah's spare room, the initial shock began to morph into a cold, hard anger. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying scenes from the past few years, searching for clues like a detective sifting through a cold case. Olivia's late nights, the hushed phone calls she'd quickly end if I walked into the room, her sudden insistence on separate credit cards to build her own credit score. How could I have been so blind? The next morning, Sarah, ever practical, handed me a strong coffee and a notepad. Write it all down, Arthur. Timelines, odd behaviors, anything that feels off. We need primary sources. Her use of my professional jargon was a small comfort. As I scribbled, a memory surfaced, Olivia frantically searching for a misplaced bank statement about 3 months ago, her agitation far exceeding the situation. She'd claimed it was for a tax thing. I'd found it later, peeking out from under her audiostory personal utility repository system for essentials. It was from an unfamiliar bank. I'd thought nothing more of it then. Now it screamed conspiracy. Later that day, a tentative knock came at Sarah's door. It was David Chen, one of my brightest former students, now a young paralegal. Sarah had apparently called him. Mr. Davies, he said, his expression a mixture of concern and youthful determination. Sarah told me what happened. I am good with financial tracking. If there's anything, any obscure accounts or transfers, I can try to find them. Pro bono, of course. For my favorite history teacher. His offer was a lifeline. I also recalled a seemingly innocuous comment from our neighbor, old Mrs. Henderson, a week prior. Saw Olivia with a gentleman friend the other day, Arthur, driving a very flashy sports car. Said he was a financial advisor helping her with investments. At the time, I'd assumed it was for her boutique. Now the words, flashy sports car, and financial advisor, painted a very different, much more sinister picture. My initial thoughts were of betrayal, pure and simple. Now, I was starting to see the outline of a premeditated, possibly collaborative, financial assault. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Sarah was my rock. A nurse used to dealing with crises, she exuded a calm competence that anchored me. She won't get away with this, Arthur. Sarah stated, not as a question, but as a fact, as she reviewed my scribbled notes. This isn't just a nasty divorce, this is calculated theft. David, meanwhile, had taken the vague memory of the unfamiliar bank statement and Mrs. Henderson's comment as his starting point. Most people, even when they're trying to be sneaky, leave digital breadcrumbs, Mr. Davies. Especially if there's a third party involved who fancies himself a financial advisor. He spoke with a confidence that was surprisingly reassuring. Sarah also reminded me about my pre-existing conditions, the diagnosed anxiety, the stress-induced palpitations. Get those medical records, Arthur. Document everything. Her timing, wiping out the accounts while you're clearly under duress, that's not just immoral, it's legally precarious for her. The support was immense, not just emotionally, but practically. David, with his access to certain databases and his understanding of financial forensics, was a godsend. He was digging, legally and ethically, but digging nonetheless. Within a few days, David called with an update, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Mr. Davies, I think I found something. Olivia opened a new account at a smaller credit union about 18 months ago. Sole signatory. There have been regular significant cash deposits, usually just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. And guess who signed on a safety deposit box at that same branch a month after the account was opened? A Mr. Mark Jenkins. Does that name mean anything to you? It didn't, not immediately. He lists his profession as a private investment consultant. David continued. The flashy sports car. The financial advisor. It clicked. This wasn't just Olivia, this was a conspiracy. Sarah, after hearing this, pulled up Olivia's social media, which Olivia rarely used but hadn't fully locked down. Hidden deep in tagged photos from a friend's boutique opening a year ago, there was Olivia, laughing, a little too close to a smarmy-looking man in an expensive suit. A quick reverse image search by David confirmed it. Mark Jenkins. He had a string of failed businesses and a reputation for charming older women out of their savings. The bank records David managed to unearth through publicly available information and some clever, perfectly legal, cross-referencing showed a pattern: my overtime paychecks, my annual teaching bonuses, chunks of money Olivia would transfer from our joint account claiming it was for boutique inventory, were rerouted, often in smaller, less noticeable amounts, into this secret account. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. This was a meticulously planned financial siphoning operation. The scope of it was horrifying. They hadn't just taken our savings. They had been systematically bleeding me dry for nearly 2 years. The initial numbness had given way to a searing anger, but now a cold, hard resolve was setting in. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a historian facing a revisionist narrative of my own life, and I was determined to set the record straight with verifiable evidence. The pain was still there, a deep ache of betrayal, but it was now fueling a desire for justice, not just revenge. I'd spent my life teaching about the consequences of actions, about empires rising and falling on the hubris of their leaders. Olivia and her cohort had shown their hubris. It was time for their fall. With Sarah's strong encouragement and a folder full of David's preliminary findings, I made an appointment with Eleanor Vance, a lawyer Sarah knew through a hospital colleague whose divorce she'd handled. Eleanor was sharp, no nonsense, with eyes that missed nothing. Her office was organized, efficient, much like the woman herself. I laid out the timeline, the bank statements, the social media photos, Mrs. Henderson's unwitting testimony, and my own documented medical history of stress-related issues. Eleanor listened intently, occasionally jotting notes, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back. Mr. Davies, she began, her voice calm but firm. What Olivia has done is not just grounds for a very contentious divorce, it's financial malfeasance, possibly even elder abuse, given your documented vulnerability due to health concerns and her systematic deception. Elder abuse wasn't a term I'd associated with myself at 47, but she explained it could apply to vulnerable adults. The secret account, the pattern of withdrawals, Mr. Jenkins' involvement, it's a classic setup. Our first step is to file an emergency motion to freeze that secret account. If it still has funds, and any other assets we can identify traceable to marital funds. We also need to petition for exclusive use of the marital home, given it's solely in your name, and you were effectively ousted by her actions while vulnerable. Her strategy was aggressive but precise. She's counting on you being too devastated or too nice to fight back hard, Mr. Davies. We need to disabuse her of that notion immediately. For the first time in days, a sliver of hope cut through the gloom. This wasn't just my fight anymore. A week later, Eleanor called me into her office, a grim satisfaction on her face. David Chen is a little wizard, she said, handing me a sheaf of papers. He used some legal discovery tools we initiated to trace those cash deposits Olivia was making. Many of them coincide with dates you received bonus payments or cashed out savings bonds. But here's the kicker. She pointed to a series of wire transfers from Olivia's secret account to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, an account opened under a shell corporation, with Mark Jenkins listed as a director. They weren't just saving it, Arthur. They were actively moving it out of reach, or so they thought. The amounts were staggering, far more than I'd even realized was missing from our joint life, because it included money she'd siphoned from her boutique, which, it turned out, I had unknowingly capitalized significantly through our joint account. Loans. To her. This offshore account, Eleanor continued, was likely Jenkins' escape plan, and he was planning to take Olivia and a substantial chunk of your marital assets with him. The rage that surged through me was immense, but beneath it, a grim sense of vindication. These weren't just amateur thieves, they were sophisticated, calculating crooks. Seeing the undeniable proof. The account numbers, the transfer confirmations, Jenkins' smug face on the incorporation documents. Was sickening, but it was also the smoking gun we needed. My curriculum vitae of a life was being rewritten with irrefutable footnotes. The conspiracy was far larger and more insidious than I'd imagined. Jenkins wasn't just a lover, he was the architect of a long con, with Olivia as his willing, or perhaps cleverly manipulated, accomplice. David's digging, guided by Eleanor, revealed that Jenkins had a history of this, though he'd always managed to skate just outside the lines of criminality, settling with gag orders. He targeted women he perceived as having access to assets but perhaps lacking financial sophistication or emotional fulfillment. Olivia, with her desire for a grander lifestyle and her increasing dissatisfaction with our quiet life, was a perfect mark who then became a co-conspirator. They weren't just aiming for our joint savings, they were trying to liquidate everything, including potentially forcing a sale of the house. Their goal was clear, utter financial ruin for me, a clean slate and a fortune for them. The urgency to act became paramount. Eleanor moved swiftly. We filed the emergency motions in family court, attaching copious documentation, bank statements, wire transfer records, affidavits from me and David Severn as an expert witness on the financial tracing, and even a discreetly obtained statement from Mrs. Henderson. We petitioned for an immediate freeze on all known assets of Olivia and Mark Jenkins, including the offshore accounts, a long shot, but necessary to filed, and for an ex parte order granting me temporary exclusive possession of the marital home. The court date was set for the following week. A process server delivered the court summons and restraining order, preventing asset disposal to Olivia at her boutique. According to Eleanor, Olivia's reaction was one of shock, quickly followed by frantic calls to her lawyer. Jenkins, true to form, reportedly became harder to reach. They had clearly underestimated me, assuming I'd crumble or accept a paltry settlement. The email from Olivia's lawyer shifted tone from dismissive to accusatory, claiming I was the one engaging in financial impropriety by, unilaterally, seeking to control assets. It was a desperate, transparent ploy. The hearing took place in a sterile courtroom. Olivia was there, looking pale and stressed, next to her lawyer and a glowering Mark Jenkins, who, as a party with alleged financial involvement, had been subpoenaed. I sat with Eleanor, trying to keep my expression neutral, like a student facing an oral exam on their life's work. Judge Marion Holloway, a woman known for her sharp intellect and intolerance for financial deception in divorce cases, presided. Olivia's lawyer argued that Olivia was merely protecting her share of marital assets from a controlling and increasingly erratic husband. Eleanor, cool and methodical, presented our evidence: the timeline of my documented health decline, the concurrent draining of the joint account, the establishment of the secret account, the cash deposits, and, damningly, the wire transfers to Jenkins' offshore shell corporation. She painted a clear picture of calculated exploitation. Your Honor, Eleanor stated, this isn't a case of a woman protecting her assets. This is a case of a woman, aided by Mr. Jenkins, systematically defrauding her husband during a period of known vulnerability. This is manifest destiny for grifters. The use of the historical term, albeit sarcastically, brought a grim smile to my lips. Eleanor had saved one piece of evidence for a strategic moment. After Olivia's lawyer made a tearful essay and, to me, utterly unconvincing, plea about Olivia's fear for her future, Eleanor requested permission to play a short audio recording. It was a voicemail Jenkins had inadvertently left on Olivia's phone after they knew I was investigating, a message David had managed to recover from a cloud backup Olivia had forgotten about. In it, Jenkins was clearly coaching Olivia on how to feign distress, crying, "Just tell them he was always tight with money, that you were scared he'd leave you with nothing. We stick to the plan, baby, and we're golden." The courtroom was silent as Jenkins' voice filled the air. Olivia's face went ashen. Jenkins looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Judge Holloway's eyes, cold as steel, fixed on Olivia and then Jenkins. The evidence presented, she began, her voice devoid of warmth, paints a deeply disturbing picture of calculated financial deception and exploitation. The timing of the joint account depletion, coinciding with Mr. Davies' documented medical vulnerability, is particularly egregious. The subsequent attempts to hide and move assets offshore demonstrate a clear intent to defraud. She paused, the silence in the courtroom heavy. Therefore, I am granting Mr. Davies' motions. All identified accounts of Ms. Davies and Mr. Jenkins, including attempts to trace and freeze funds in the Sunrise Holdings entity in the Cayman Islands, are hereby frozen. Mr. Davies is granted temporary exclusive use and possession of the marital residence. A forensic accountant will be appointed by the court, at Ms. Davies and Mr. Jenkins' expense, to trace all marital assets. And Ms. Wells, she addressed Olivia's stunned lawyer, I'd advise your client and Mr. Jenkins to cooperate fully. Any further attempts at obfuscation will be met with the severest consequences, including potential criminal referrals. Olivia slumped in her chair. Jenkins stared straight ahead, his composure shattered. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was the feeling of a long, arduous battle having turned a decisive corner. The empire of deceit was beginning to crumble. Well, the forensic accountant's report was a masterpiece of financial archaeology, unearthing every hidden transaction, every shell game Olivia and Jenkins had played. It turned out Jenkins had been systematically isolating Olivia from her own boutique's finances too, diverting profits, and even taking out loans against the business, all flowing towards their planned escape. The full picture was one of breathtaking greed and manipulation, with Olivia as both a perpetrator against me and, to some extent, a victim of Jenkins' grander scheme. The divorce was finalized with brutal efficiency. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and conspiracy, Olivia and Jenkins had little leverage. Jenkins, facing potential criminal charges and pressure from other women he'd apparently defrauded who were now coming forward, inspired by the public court filings, agreed to repatriate a significant portion of the offshore funds in exchange for a plea deal in a separate civil consolidated case. Olivia was left with virtually nothing. The court awarded me the house outright, 100% of my remaining retirement funds, and a judgment against Olivia for the amount she'd initially stolen, plus legal fees. She was also made solely responsible for the boutique's debts Jenkins had incurred. Our marriage was dissolved, not with sadness, but with the grim finality of an autopsy report. I never spoke to her again after that final court appearance. All communication was through lawyers. It was a clean, albeit painful, amputation. The first thing I did was put the house up for sale. It was a beautiful home, but it was tainted by betrayal, its rooms echoing with too many lies. It sold quickly in the current market. I used the proceeds to buy a smaller, manageable condo in a different neighborhood, closer to Sarah, and in a good school district should I ever choose to return to classroom, teaching full time, though the thought felt distant. For now, the idea of being surrounded by the politics and pressures of the public school system was unappealing. The reconstruction era of my life had begun. My doctor had been adamant about reducing stress. The palpitations, the anxiety, they were warning signs my body was at its limit. Teaching, while rewarding, was also incredibly demanding. During my forced leave, I'd started doing some freelance curriculum consulting and online history tutoring, discovering I enjoyed the flexibility and lower stress. With the settlement, I didn't need to rush back into a high-pressure job. Unexpectedly, the disability insurance I'd been paying into for years through the teachers' union kicked in, covering a portion of my former salary due to the medically documented stress and anxiety. It was an indemnity I hadn't counted on but deeply appreciated. This financial cushion, combined with my freelance work and the proceeds from the house, gave me something I hadn't had in years: breathing room and choices. I started exercising regularly, rediscovered my love for quiet reading, not for lesson prep, just for pleasure, and spent more time with Sarah and David, who had become like a younger brother. My life was simpler, quieter, but also richer in genuine connections. The legal battle had been costly, even with the judgment against Olivia. A significant portion of the recovered funds went to Eleanor, and rightly so. But there was enough. One evening, David mentioned he was struggling to save for a specialist course that would significantly boost his paralegal career, something related to international asset recovery, ironically relevant. Without hesitation, I wrote him a check to cover the fees. Consider it an investment in future historical anachronism prevention, I joked. His gratitude was overwhelming, but seeing his talent and dedication find a new path was a reward in itself. Helping him felt like reclaiming a piece of my own narrative, transforming the poison of betrayal into something positive. It wasn't about grand gestures, but about finding meaning in small acts of support, a kind of personal philanthropy born from pain. A year after the implosion, I found myself sitting on my new, smaller balcony, watching the sunset. The tightness in my chest was gone. The anger had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I thought of Olivia and Jenkins, not with hatred, but with a distant pity for the emptiness that must have driven them. They had tried to erase my history, to bankrupt my future, but in doing so, they'd inadvertently liberated me from a life that was, in retrospect, slowly suffocating me. I picked up a biography of Marcus Aurelius I'd been reading. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The betrayal, the financial ruin, the health scares, they had been immense impediments. But they had also forced me to re-evaluate everything, to fight for myself, to rebuild on a truer foundation. Sometimes, the greatest revolutions are personal, fought not on battlefields, but in the quiet corridors of the heart and mind. My old life was a chapter closed, a historical period studied and understood. The future was an unwritten page, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to write it.